I was standing at my kitchen window, coffee in hand, when I saw the white sedan pull onto my property and park right in front of my gate like they owned the place. The woman who stepped out looked like she had requested to speak to the manager of every establishment within a 50-mile radius of Lexington, Kentucky. Her blonde hair was cut in that distinctive angular bob, and even from a distance, I could see the tight expression on her face as she marched toward my front door. My name is Grant Owens, and I had just moved to this beautiful piece of land 6 months ago. 10 acres of rolling Kentucky hills with a private road that wound through trees and opened up to my modern farmhouse. The property had belonged to my grandfather, and when he passed, he left it to me in his will. The land had been in my family since the 1950s, long before any subdivision or homeowner association had even been conceived in this area. The doorbell rang with an aggressive persistence that told me this woman was used to getting her way. I set down my coffee and walked to the door, opening it to find her standing there with a clipboard and an expression that could curdle milk. "Can I help you?" I asked, keeping my tone neutral. "I certainly hope so," she said, not introducing herself. "I'm Deborah Henderson, president of the Meadowbrook Hills Homeowners Association. We need to discuss your non-compliance with community standards." I blinked at her. "I'm sorry, what?" "Your private road," she said, tapping her pen against the clipboard. "It's blocking access to the community hiking trail that was planned for this area. We need you to open it to all residents immediately." I actually laughed. I could not help it. "Madam, this is my private property. That road was built by my grandfather in 1962. There's no HOA here, and even if there was, I'm not a member." Her face flushed red. "That's where you're wrong. This entire area falls under Meadowbrook Hills HOA jurisdiction. We have maps and documentation proving it." "Then your maps are wrong," I said firmly. "My property predates your subdivision by about 60 years. I have the deed, the original survey, everything. This land is not part of any HOA." Deborah's eyes narrowed. "I don't think you understand the seriousness of this situation. The HOA board voted unanimously that this road needs to be public access. We've already had complaints from residents who want to use it for their morning walks." "Complaints," I repeated, "about my private road on my private property." "It's not private if it falls within HOA boundaries," she insisted. I took a deep breath, reminding myself to stay calm. "Look, Mrs. Henderson, I appreciate you stopping by, but you're mistaken. This property is not part of your HOA. It never has been, and it never will be. The road is private, and it's staying that way." "We'll see about that," she snapped. "You'll be hearing from our attorney." She turned on her heel and marched back to her car, leaving me standing in my doorway wondering what fresh hell I had just stumbled into. I had moved here for peace and quiet, to finally have some space after years of living in cramped apartments in Louisville. The last thing I needed was some power-hungry HOA president trying to claim my land. I went back inside and pulled out the metal file box where I kept all the important documents about the property. The deed was crystal clear. The land had been purchased by my grandfather, Thomas Owens, in 1955. He had built the house in 1958 and the road in 1962 to provide easier access from the main highway. There was no mention of any homeowner association, no easements, no shared access agreements. Nothing. 2 days later, I received a certified letter from the Meadowbrook Hills HOA. It was 3 pages of legal jargon that essentially demanded I open my road to community use within 30 days or face fines of $500 per day. They cited some obscure county ordinance about public access and claimed that my road had been designated as a community amenity in their development plans. I immediately called a real estate attorney in Lexington named Marcus Chen. I had found him through a friend's recommendation, and his reviews online suggested he did not mess around when it came to property disputes. "This is interesting," Marcus said after I emailed him copies of everything. "Very interesting." "Interesting good or interesting bad?" I asked. "Interesting as in they have absolutely no legal leg to stand on," he replied. "Your property is completely separate from their subdivision. It was never part of the original development, and you never signed any HOA agreement. They can send you all the letters they want, but they have zero authority over your land. So what do I do? Write them back. Tell them to cease and desist. I'll draft something official for you, and if they continue to harass you, we'll take further action." Marcus sent over a strongly worded letter that afternoon. I printed it, signed it, and sent it certified mail back to the HOA. I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. 3 weeks later, I woke up to find construction equipment parked at the entrance to my road. Not on my property exactly, but right at the junction where my private road met the public highway. There were orange cones everywhere, and 2 workers were setting up what looked like a gate system. I pulled on jeans and a jacket and headed down there immediately. A man in a hard hat was directing the operation, and I recognized him as one of the residents from the Meadowbrook Hills subdivision. I had seen him at the local hardware store a few times. "What's going on here?" I asked. He turned to me with a friendly smile. "HOA project. We're installing a community access gate to the hiking trail." "This is my private road," I said. "You can't do this." His smile faded. "I'm just following the work order, man. Take it up with the HOA board." "I'm taking it up with you right now. This is my property and you're trespassing." "Pack up your equipment and leave." The man looked uncomfortable. "Look, I'm just a contractor. The HOA hired me to do this job and they showed me all the permits and everything." "What permits?" I demanded. "Let me see them." He walked over to his truck and pulled out a folder. Inside were several official-looking documents with the county seal on them. My blood pressure spiked as I read through them. The HOA had somehow obtained a permit to install a gate and pathway connector at this exact location, claiming it was for public access to county park land. "This is fraud," I said. "There's no county park land here. This is my private property." The contractor shrugged helplessly. "I don't know what to tell you. This all looked legitimate to me." I pulled out my phone and called Marcus Chen immediately. He answered on the second ring and I explained the situation. "Don't let them do any work," Marcus said. "I'm calling the county right now to verify those permits. If they're fraudulent, we're looking at a much bigger problem." I turned to the contractor. "You need to stop work immediately. Those permits are under investigation." "I can't just stop," he protested. "I have a contract, and I have a deed that proves this is my land. If you continue, you're trespassing, and I'll call the police." The contractor looked torn, but eventually he made a call to someone. I could hear angry voices on the other end of the line. After a few minutes, he hung up and nodded reluctantly. "Fine. We'll pause until this gets sorted out, but you're going to be hearing from the HOA's lawyer." "I'm looking forward to it," I said. Marcus called me back an hour later with news. "Those permits are fake." "Well, not completely fake. They're real permits, but they were obtained using falsified information. The HOA submitted an application claiming they owned the property and needed to install public access infrastructure. The county approved it without properly verifying ownership. Can they do that? They absolutely cannot. I've already filed a complaint with the county, and they're launching an investigation. In the meantime, I'm drafting an emergency motion to get a temporary restraining order against the HOA to prevent them from doing anything else on your property." "This is insane," I muttered. It gets better, Marcus continued. I did some digging into the Meadowbrook Hills HOA. Deborah Henderson has been president for 8 years, and there have been multiple complaints filed against her with the county. Harassment, intimidation, improper use of HOA funds, nothing that resulted in charges but a clear pattern of behavior. Over the next few days, things escalated rapidly. The HOA sent me another letter, this time claiming I owed them $12,000 in back dues for the 6 months I had lived there, plus the accumulating fines for not opening my road. They also sent violation notices for my non-conforming house paint color, my unauthorized satellite dish, and my excessive number of vehicles, which was 2, a truck and a sedan. I started receiving calls from other Meadowbrook Hills residents. Some were hostile, repeating whatever lies Deborah had told them about me being a difficult neighbor who was preventing community improvements. Others were sympathetic, quietly telling me that Deborah had a history of bullying people and that they supported my fight. One woman named Patricia called me on a Thursday evening. "Mr. Owens, I'm so sorry about what's happening to you. Deborah tried the same thing with the Martins 3 years ago. They owned a small parcel on the other side of the subdivision, and she claimed they had to pay HOA dues. They ended up selling and moving away just to escape the harassment." "That's terrible," I said. "She's out of control," Patricia continued. "But most people are too afraid to stand up to her. She has this way of making life miserable for anyone who crosses her. Petty violations, constant fines, spreading rumors. It's exhausting." "Well, I'm not going anywhere," I told her. "This was my grandfather's land, and I'm not letting some power-hungry HOA president steal it from me." "Good for you," Patricia said. "If you need any witnesses or statements, let me know. A lot of us would be willing to testify about her behavior." Marcus filed the restraining order, and we got a court date set for 2 weeks out. In the meantime, the HOA continued their harassment campaign. They sent people to photograph my property from the road, documented every tiny perceived violation, and even tried to report me to code enforcement for imaginary infractions. The code enforcement officer who came out was a middle-aged man named Robert who looked thoroughly annoyed at having his time wasted. He walked around my property, checked everything the HOA had complained about, and then shook his head. "There's nothing wrong here," he said. "Your property is in excellent condition, well-maintained, and in full compliance with all county codes. Whoever filed these complaints is either confused or malicious." "Definitely malicious," I said. "The HOA is trying to force me to give them access to my private road." Robert sighed. "I've dealt with Meadowbrook Hills before. That Henderson woman is relentless. Good luck with your case. For what it's worth, I'll be noting in my report that all complaints were unfounded and appear to be part of a harassment campaign." "I appreciate that," I said. The day of the hearing arrived, and I met Marcus at the Fayette County Courthouse in Lexington. It was a beautiful old building with high ceilings and marble floors. We were assigned to courtroom 4, and Judge Samuel Morrison was presiding. Deborah Henderson showed up with the HOA's attorney, a slick-looking man in an expensive suit named Ronald Pierce. He carried a large briefcase and had the confident air of someone who believed he had already won. The hearing began with Judge Morrison reviewing the case. He was an older man with silver hair and sharp eyes that suggested he had seen every trick in the book and would not tolerate nonsense in his courtroom. "This is a motion for a temporary restraining order," Judge Morrison said. "Mr. Owens is seeking to prevent the Meadowbrook Hills Homeowners Association from taking any action regarding his property. Mr. Chen, you may present your argument." Marcus stood and laid out our case methodically. He presented the original deed from 1955, the survey maps showing the property boundaries, and documentation proving that my land had never been part of the Meadowbrook Hills development. He also presented evidence of the fraudulent permit application and the pattern of harassment. Your Honor, this is a clear case of overreach by an HOA attempting to exert authority where it has none, Marcus concluded. Mr. Owens has never been a member of this HOA, has never signed any agreement with them, and his property predates their existence by decades. They have no legal standing to make demands of him or to take any action regarding his property. Judge Morrison turned to Ronald Pierce. Mr. Pierce, I'm looking at these documents and they seem pretty conclusive. What's your counterargument? Ronald stood smoothly. Your Honor, while it's true that Mr. Owens's property was not originally part of the Meadowbrook Hills development, the situation changed when the subdivision was built. The county approved our development plans, which included public access routes throughout the area. Mr. Owens's road falls within the designated public access corridor, and therefore, the HOA has the authority to manage it as a community amenity. You have documentation of this public access designation? Judge Morrison asked. We do, Your Honor. Ronald pulled out a map and several documents. This is the approved development plan from 2010. As you can see, the corridor is clearly marked. Marcus immediately stood. Your Honor, may I see those documents? Judge Morrison nodded, and the bailiff brought the documents to our table. Marcus studied them for a moment, then looked up with barely concealed satisfaction. Your Honor, these documents are meaningless. The HOA's development plan shows a proposed public access corridor, but that proposal would require acquiring property rights or an easement from Mr. Owens, which never happened. You cannot simply draw a line on a map through someone's private property and claim authority over it. That's not how property law works. Judge Morrison leaned forward. Mr. Pierce, did the HOA ever acquire an easement or any property rights from Mr. Owens or his grandfather? Ronald hesitated. Your Honor, we believed that the county's approval of our development plan granted us those rights. That's not how it works, Judge Morrison said flatly. You cannot take someone's property rights through a development plan approval. Mr. Chen is correct. This is basic property law. Deborah Henderson suddenly stood up from her seat behind Ronald. Your Honor, if I may speak. Judge Morrison looked at her with raised eyebrows. Mrs. Henderson, you're represented by counsel. Please sit down and let him handle this. But, Your Honor, you don't understand. That road is essential for our community. We've planned our entire trail system around it. Mr. Owens is being unreasonable and selfish. He has no reason to keep that road private except to be difficult. Judge Morrison's expression hardened. Mrs. Henderson, I'm going to say this once. Sit down. Your personal feelings about Mr. Owens's decisions regarding his own property are irrelevant. This is a court of law, not a community meeting. Deborah sat, her face flushed with anger. Ronald placed a hand on her arm, clearly trying to calm her down. Judge Morrison looked back at the documents in front of him. I'm ready to rule. This case is straightforward. Mr. Owens owns property that predates the Meadowbrook Hills HOA by several decades. He has never been a member of the HOA, never signed any agreement with them, and they have never acquired any property rights or easements over his land. Therefore, the HOA has no authority over his property whatsoever. He turned to Ronald. Mr. Pierce, I'm troubled by the fraudulent permit application that your client submitted to the county. That's a serious matter that may result in criminal charges. I'm also concerned about the pattern of harassment documented here. Your Honor, I was not aware of the permit situation until today, Ronald said quickly. That decision was made without my consultation. That may be, but your client still bears responsibility. Judge Morrison signed a document. I'm granting the temporary restraining order. The Meadowbrook Hills HOA is hereby prohibited from taking any action regarding Mr. Owens's property, including sending violation notices, demanding payment of dues or fines, or attempting to access his land. This order will remain in effect pending a full hearing on the merits, which I'm scheduling for 6 weeks from today. Deborah jumped to her feet again. This is outrageous. You're letting him get away with destroying our community. Judge Morrison's gaze turned icy. Mrs. Henderson, you need to control yourself. One more outburst and I'll hold you in contempt. But Your Honor, that's it. Bailiff, please escort Mrs. Henderson out of my courtroom. Mrs. Henderson, you are in contempt of court. You'll pay a $500 fine, and if you set foot in my courtroom again before the next scheduled hearing, you'll face jail time. Do I make myself clear? The bailiff approached Deborah, who looked shocked and furious. She grabbed her purse and stormed out before the bailiff could touch her, slamming the courtroom door behind her. Judge Morrison shook his head and looked at Ronald. Mr. Pierce, I suggest you have a serious conversation with your client about appropriate courtroom behavior and the legal realities of this situation. I'll see you all in 6 weeks. We left the courthouse, and I felt like I could finally breathe. Marcus was grinning. That went better than I expected, he said. Judge Morrison is no nonsense, and he saw right through their arguments. What happens now? I asked. We prepare for the full hearing, but honestly, I think this case is essentially over. The judge has already made it clear where he stands. The HOA has no legal basis for their claims, and after Deborah's behavior today, I doubt the judge will have any sympathy for them. In 6 weeks, we should get a permanent injunction, and this nightmare will be over. I went home feeling victorious but also drained. The stress of the past few weeks had taken its toll. I just wanted to live peacefully on my land without constant harassment and legal battles. Unfortunately, Deborah Henderson was not the type to accept defeat gracefully. 3 days after the hearing, I found my mailbox smashed and lying in the ditch. The day after that, someone spray-painted "selfish" across my gate. I installed security cameras immediately and called the police to report the vandalism. The responding officer was a young woman named Deputy Sarah Mills. She took photos of the damage and filed a report. I know you're having issues with the HOA, she said. We've been getting calls from other residents about increased tensions in the neighborhood. Do you have any proof of who did this? Not yet, I said. But I just installed cameras, so if it happens again, I'll have footage. Good, keep documentation of everything. If this is part of a harassment campaign, that evidence will be important. The vandalism stopped after I put up the cameras, but the harassment continued in other forms. I started receiving dozens of phone calls from blocked numbers at all hours of the day and night. When I answered, no one spoke, they just hung up. I began receiving magazine subscriptions I had never ordered and had food deliveries show up at my house that I had not requested. Someone also filed a false report with animal control, claiming I had vicious dogs running loose on my property. I did not own any dogs. The animal control officer was apologetic when he arrived and found nothing. This is the 3rd false report we've gotten this week from your area, he said. Someone's abusing the system. I'm going to flag this address so we don't keep wasting resources responding to bogus calls. I documented everything and sent it all to Marcus. He added it to our growing file of evidence. This is actually helping our case, Marcus said. It demonstrates a clear pattern of retaliation and harassment. The judge is going to take this very seriously. 2 weeks before the scheduled hearing, I finally caught a break. My security cameras captured footage of someone approaching my property at 2 in the morning. The figure was wearing dark clothing and a hood, but they made the mistake of looking directly at one of the cameras when they were trying to figure out where it was positioned. It was Deborah Henderson's teenage son, Kyle. I recognized him from photos I had seen on social media. He was carrying a can of spray paint and appeared to be planning another vandalism attack, but he spotted the cameras and fled. I immediately sent the footage to Deputy Mills. She came out the next day to review it. "That's definitely Kyle Henderson," she confirmed. "I know him. He's had a few run-ins with us before, minor stuff. I'll have a talk with him and his mother." "I want to press charges," I said. "This has gone on long enough." "I understand. Let me bring him in for questioning first, see what he says." Deputy Mills called me the next afternoon. Kyle admitted to the vandalism. He says his mother put him up to it, said you deserved it for being a bad neighbor. "I've charged him with criminal mischief, and based on his statement, we're investigating Deborah Henderson for solicitation of vandalism." "Good," I said. "Maybe that will finally get through to her." It did not. If anything, it made her more desperate and reckless. A week before the hearing, I received a frantic call from Patricia, the woman who had reached out to me earlier. "Mr. Owens, you need to know what's happening," she said breathlessly. "Deborah has been calling an emergency HOA meeting. She's trying to get the members to pool money together for a special assessment to buy your property through eminent domain or something. She's telling everyone that if you win the case, it will destroy property values in the neighborhood." "That's ridiculous," I said, "and you cannot just use eminent domain for private purposes." "I know that, but a lot of people here don't. She's very convincing and she's scaring people. I think she's planning something drastic." "Like what?" "I don't know, but be careful. She's been acting erratic. Some of us are really worried." I thanked Patricia and immediately called Marcus to inform him about the situation. He was concerned but not surprised. "Desperate people do desperate things," he said. "Make sure your security system is working properly, and if you see anything suspicious, call the police immediately. We're so close to ending this. Don't let her provoke you into doing anything that could hurt our case." The night before the hearing, I barely slept. I kept thinking about everything that had led to this moment, all the stress and harassment, the money I had spent on legal fees, the time I had lost dealing with this nonsense. All because some HOA president could not accept that she did not have unlimited power over everyone around her. I arrived at the courthouse the next morning to find a group of about 20 Meadowbrook Hills residents gathered outside. Some held signs that said things like "Community Rights Matter" and "Stop Selfish Neighbors." Deborah was in the middle of them, directing their chanting. Marcus met me at the entrance. "Ignore them. It's just theater. None of that matters inside the courtroom." We went through security and headed to courtroom 4. Judge Morrison was already in place, looking over documents. Ronald Pierce was there, looking significantly less confident than he had at the first hearing. Deborah came in with several other HOA board members, all wearing matching navy blue blazers like they were some kind of official delegation. Judge Morrison called the hearing to order. "We're here for a final hearing on the injunction matter between Grant Owens and the Meadowbrook Hills Homeowners Association. I've reviewed all the submitted materials, including the additional evidence of harassment and vandalism. Mr. Chen, anything you want to add?" Marcus stood. "Your Honor, the evidence speaks for itself. Mr. Owens is not now, nor has he ever been, a member of the Meadowbrook Hills HOA. His property is completely separate and predates the HOA's existence. Furthermore, the HOA's response to the initial restraining order has been to escalate their harassment campaign. including encouraging vandalism of Mr. Owens's property. We're asking for a permanent injunction and damages to cover Mr. Owens's legal fees and property repairs." Judge Morrison nodded and turned to Ronald. "Mr. Pierce," Ronald stood slowly, "Your Honor, I've had extensive discussions with my client about the realities of this case. While the HOA still believes that community access to Mr. Owens's road would be beneficial, we acknowledge that we do not have the legal authority to compel such access. However, we dispute the characterization of the subsequent events as an HOA-sponsored harassment campaign. The actions of individuals should not be attributed to the organization as a whole. Mr. Pierce, I have a police report here stating that the HOA president's son admitted that she encouraged him to vandalize Mr. Owens's property. How is that not an HOA-sponsored action when it comes directly from the HOA president?" Ronald looked uncomfortable. "Your Honor, Mrs. Henderson was acting in her capacity as a mother, not as HOA president." "That's a distinction without a difference," Judge Morrison said sharply. "She cannot separate herself from her role when it's convenient. Let me ask you directly. Is the HOA prepared to stipulate that they have no authority over Mr. Owens's property and will cease all contact with him regarding this matter?" Before Ronald could answer, Deborah stood up. Her attorney tried to pull her back down, but she shook him off. "Your Honor, with all due respect, this entire proceeding is based on technicalities that ignore the bigger picture. Yes, Mr. Owens's property technically predates our HOA, but we're talking about the greater good of the community. His stubbornness is hurting hundreds of families who just want access to nature trails and walking paths. Why should one person's property rights trump the needs of an entire community?" Judge Morrison leaned back in his chair. "Mrs. Henderson, did your attorney not explain to you how property rights work in this country?" "He did, but I think the law is wrong in this case. Sometimes judges need to look beyond the strict letter of the law and do what's right." A murmur ran through the courtroom. Even the other HOA board members looked uncomfortable. Ronald was staring at his client with an expression of horror. Judge Morrison's face remained neutral, but his voice was ice cold. "Mrs. Henderson, I'm going to give you a civics lesson. Property rights are foundational to our legal system. They're not suggestions or guidelines that can be ignored when they are inconvenient. Mr. Owens owns his land. He has the deed, the surveys, all the legal documentation. You and your HOA have no claim to it whatsoever. The fact that you want to use his road does not give you the right to do so. Your wants do not override his rights. Do you understand that?" Deborah's face was red. "I understand that you're prioritizing one person over an entire community." "No, I'm prioritizing the law, which is my job. Your feelings about what should be allowed are irrelevant. Now sit down before I hold you in contempt again." Deborah sat, crossing her arms defiantly. Ronald looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. Judge Morrison turned to some additional documents on his desk. "I've also reviewed the evidence of the fraudulent permit application. Mrs. Henderson, did you personally submit that application to the county?" Deborah hesitated, then lifted her chin. "I did. I was told by someone at the county office that if we needed public access, we could apply for a permit, so that's what I did." "And when you filled out that application, did you represent that the HOA owned the property in question?" "I may have. The forms were confusing." "Mrs. Henderson, those forms are not confusing. They explicitly ask who owns the property and require documentation of ownership. You submitted false information to obtain a government permit. That's a crime." The courtroom went silent. Deborah's eyes widened. "I didn't mean to break the law. I was just trying to help the community." "Your intentions don't change the fact that you committed fraud." I'm referring this matter to the prosecutor's office for potential criminal charges." Judge Morrison made a note on his pad. Ronald finally found his voice. "Your Honor, I'm sure we can resolve this without criminal charges. Perhaps Mrs. Henderson can make restitution to Mr. Owens for his damages, and the HOA can issue a formal apology." "That's up to the prosecutor, not me," Judge Morrison said. "As for this case, I'm making my ruling. The temporary restraining order is made permanent. The Meadowbrook Hills Homeowners Association has no authority over Grant Owens's property. They are prohibited from sending him any communications regarding HOA business, from making any demands regarding his property, and from taking any action that affects his property rights. Furthermore, I'm awarding Mr. Owens $25,000 in damages to cover his legal fees, property repairs, and compensation for the harassment he has endured." Deborah gasped. Several of the other board members looked shocked. "But we don't have that kind of money in the HOA budget," one of them said. "Then you'll need to figure out how to raise it," Judge Morrison replied. "This is the consequence of your president's actions. I strongly suggest you consider whether Mrs. Henderson is the right person to lead your organization." He signed the order and looked up at Deborah one more time. "Mrs. Henderson, you are banned from having any contact with Mr. Owens, directly or indirectly. If you violate this order, you will face criminal charges for contempt of court. Do you understand?" "Yes," Deborah said quietly, all the fight suddenly drained out of her. "Good. This court is adjourned." The gavel came down and it was over. Marcus and I stood to leave, and I felt a wave of relief wash over me. It was finally done. As we walked out of the courtroom, several of the HOA board members approached us. One of them, a middle-aged man in glasses, extended his hand. "Mr. Owens, I'm Richard Fletcher, HOA treasurer. I want to apologize on behalf of the board." Many of us had no idea Deborah was going to these extremes. We thought this was a legitimate boundary dispute. If we had known about the harassment and the fraudulent permit, we would have stopped it immediately. I shook his hand cautiously. "I appreciate that. We'll be calling for a vote of no confidence at the next board meeting," Richard continued. "Deborah is finished as president, and we'll make sure the HOA pays the judgment as quickly as possible. Again, I'm truly sorry for what you've been through." Outside the courthouse, the protesters had dispersed. I saw Deborah standing alone by her car, talking on her phone. She looked defeated and small, nothing like the intimidating presence she had tried to project. Marcus clapped me on the shoulder. "Congratulations, you won." "It shouldn't have been this hard," I said. "All I wanted was to live on my own land in peace. Unfortunately, some people can't handle not having control over others, but you stood your ground and the law backed you up. That's what matters." We went to a nearby diner to celebrate. Over burgers and coffee, Marcus laid out what would happen next. The prosecutor will review the case and decide whether to file criminal charges against Deborah for the fraudulent permit and the solicitation of vandalism. Given the evidence, I think there's a good chance she'll face charges. As for the judgment, the HOA has to pay within 30 days, or we can start garnishing their accounts and putting liens on their property. "I just want this to be over," I said. "It essentially is. The permanent injunction means they can never bother you again. And trust me, after this experience, I doubt any other HOA in the county will try something similar. You've set a very clear precedent." I drove home that afternoon feeling lighter than I had in months. The Kentucky hills looked more beautiful than ever, and when I pulled onto my private road, I appreciated it in a way I never had before. This was mine, my family's land, and no one could take it from me. Over the next few weeks, I followed the aftermath of the case. Deborah Henderson was voted out as HOA president at an emergency board meeting. Richard Fletcher was appointed as interim president, and one of his first actions was to issue a formal apology to me on behalf of the HOA. They paid the judgment in full 2 weeks later, and I used the money to cover my legal fees, repair the vandalized property, and upgrade my security system. The prosecutor did file criminal charges against Deborah for fraud and solicitation of vandalism. Her trial was scheduled for 3 months out, but her attorney was already working on a plea deal. She would likely face probation and community service, along with restitution payments to the county for the fraudulent permit. Kyle Henderson, her son, was sentenced to 60 hours of community service and a year of probation for the vandalism. I actually felt a bit sorry for him. He had been manipulated by his mother into doing something stupid, and now he had a criminal record. But maybe it would teach him not to blindly follow bad examples. Patricia called me a month after the trial to update me on the neighborhood situation. "Things have calmed down significantly," she said. "The new board is much more reasonable. They're actually following proper procedures and treating people with respect. A lot of residents have told me privately that they're relieved Deborah is gone. She created such a toxic environment." "I'm glad to hear it," I said. "I never wanted to cause problems for the neighborhood. I just wanted to protect my property." "You did the right thing," Patricia assured me. "And honestly, you did us all a favor. Deborah needed to be stopped, and no one else had the courage to stand up to her. So thank you." Life settled into a peaceful routine. I spent my days working remotely as a software developer, enjoying the quiet and solitude of my property. I took long walks on my private road, appreciating every step. I planted a garden in the spring and started fixing up the old barn that my grandfather had built decades ago. One Saturday afternoon, about 6 months after the final hearing, I was working in the garden when a truck pulled up my driveway. I tensed for a moment, old anxieties flaring up, but then I saw it was Richard Fletcher from the HOA. He got out with a smile and a wave. "Hope I'm not intruding, Mr. Owens. I wanted to stop by and give you an update." "Call me Grant," I said, pulling off my gardening gloves. "What's up?" "The HOA wanted me to let you know that we've completed our new trail system. We worked with the county to acquire proper easements and built paths through land that we actually own and have permission to use. It's turned out great, and we did it the right way this time." "That's good to hear," I said. Richard hesitated, then continued. "I also wanted to ask, and please feel free to say no, but would you ever consider granting the HOA an easement to use your road? We would pay fair market value, put everything in writing, and give you complete control over the terms. No pressure whatsoever, and we completely respect your right to say no, but I thought I should at least ask." I thought about it for a moment. My first instinct was to refuse, but then I reconsidered. Richard and the new board had been respectful and apologetic. They had done things the right way. And an easement agreement, properly structured, could actually protect me by clearly defining the terms of any access. "Let me think about it," I said. "Send me a proposal in writing, have my attorney review it, and we'll see, but I'm not promising anything." "That's totally fair," Richard said. "Thank you for considering it. And again, I'm sorry for everything you went through. It should never have happened." After Richard left, I stood on my porch looking out at my land. The sun was setting behind the trees, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. This place had been worth fighting for. My grandfather had built something here, created a legacy, and I had protected it. In the end, that was what mattered. Not the stress or the legal battles or the harassment, but the fact that I had stood my ground and won. The law had worked the way it was supposed to. Property rights had been upheld. and a bully had been stopped. I eventually did agree to grant the HOA a limited easement for their trail system, but only after months of negotiation and with strict terms that protected my interests. The easement was for walking and biking only, limited to certain hours, and could be revoked if the terms were violated. The HOA paid me $30,000 for the easement rights, money I used to restore my grandfather's barn and make other improvements to the property. The criminal case against Deborah Henderson concluded about a year after the original incident. She pleaded guilty to fraud and was sentenced to 2 years of probation, 200 hours of community service, and ordered to pay restitution to both the county and to me. She also had to undergo anger management counseling. I heard through the grapevine that she and her family moved away from Meadowbrook Hills shortly after her sentencing. Apparently, the shame and social consequences of what she had done were too much for them to handle in the neighborhood. I never saw her again, and I was fine with that. Some people never learn that the world does not revolve around them, that other people have rights that must be respected. Deborah had been so convinced of her own righteousness, so certain that her vision for the community trumped my property rights, that she had been willing to break the law and ruin lives to get what she wanted. But the law had other ideas. Judge Morrison had been crystal clear about the fundamental principle at stake. Property rights are not negotiable. They are not subject to the whims of majority rule or the desires of community organizations. If an HOA wants to use private property, they have to acquire it legally, through purchase or properly negotiated easements. They cannot simply decide they have authority over land they do not own. The whole experience taught me valuable lessons about standing up for yourself, about the importance of documentation and good legal representation, and about the fact that bullies often back down when they face real consequences. Deborah Henderson had gotten away with intimidating people for years because no one had the resources or the courage to fight back. Once someone finally did, her whole house of cards collapsed. I also learned that most people are fundamentally decent. The majority of Meadowbrook Hills residents had no idea what Deborah was doing. They had believed her narrative about me being a difficult neighbor, but once the truth came out, they were horrified and apologetic. Richard Fletcher and the new HOA board worked hard to repair the organization's reputation and to operate ethically and legally. 2 years after the initial confrontation, I attended a neighborhood barbecue at Patricia's invitation. It was strange being around so many Meadowbrook Hills residents after everything that had happened, but people were welcoming and friendly. Several came up to thank me for standing up to Deborah, saying that the neighborhood was a much better place now. I talked to Richard for a while, and he told me about the improvements the HOA had made. They had revised their bylaws to prevent any one person from having too much power, implemented better financial oversight, and created a grievance process for residents who felt they were being treated unfairly. You know, in a weird way, what happened with you was the best thing that could have happened to this HOA, Richard said. It forced us to confront some serious problems and make real changes. We're a much healthier organization now. I'm glad something good came out of it, I said. But I still wouldn't want to be an HOA member, Richard laughed. Fair enough, to each their own. As I drove home that evening, back down my private road to my quiet house on my own land, I reflected on how much had changed. The fear and stress were gone, replaced by a sense of security and peace. I had fought for what was mine and won. The legal system had worked. Justice had been served. My grandfather had always told me that land was the most important thing you could own, that it represented freedom and independence. He had been right. This property was more than just dirt and trees. It was my sanctuary, my heritage, my future. And no one, not even the most aggressive HOA president, could take that away from me. I spent the rest of that evening on my porch, watching fireflies dance across the yard as night fell. The crickets sang their evening chorus, and somewhere in the distance, an owl hooted. This was what I had fought for, the right to sit on my own land, in my own peace, without anyone telling me what I could or could not do with my private property. It had been worth every moment of stress, every dollar spent on legal fees, every sleepless night worrying about the outcome. Because in the end, I had won. The judge had ruled clearly. I was not an HOA member, and they had no rights over my property. That ruling stood as a permanent protection, a legal shield that would protect me and my land for as long as I owned it. And I planned to own it for the rest of my life, just as my grandfather had done before me. This was Owens' land, bought and paid for decades ago, and it would remain Owens' land. That was something no HOA could ever change, no matter how hard they tried. The law was on my side, and the law had prevailed. Justice had been served, and I could finally live in peace on the land that was rightfully mine.